September 3rd, 1939, Neville Chamberlain voice cracked across every radio in Britain. This country is at war with Germany. In living rooms across London, families sat in silence, mothers held their children, fathers stared at the floor. And then something happened, something that Britain has spent 80 years trying to forget. People picked up their cats, their dogs, their beloved family companions, and welcomed them to the nearest veterinary clinic to have them killed. Not because they were sick, not because they were dangerous, because they were afraid. Within the first 4 days of World War II, over 400,000 dogs and cats were slaughtered. By the end of that first week, 750,000 pets were dead. A quarter of England's entire pet population gone. This is not a story about bombs, not about battlefields, not about soldiers. This is a story about fear, about panic, about what ordinary people do when the world falls apart around them. And it is one of the darkest, most heartbreaking, most forgotten stories of World War II. Stay with me because what you are about to hear actually happened. To understand why this happened, you must first understand what pets mean to the British people. Britain in the 1930s was a nation of animal lovers. The National Air Raid Precautions Animals Committee estimated that England was home to 6 to 7 million dogs and cats alone, 56 million poultry, and more than 37 million farm animals, nearly twice as many domestic animals as there were people in the country. For ordinary British families, a dog or cat was not just a pet, it was a member of the family. In working class neighborhoods of London, where houses were small and money was scarce, the family dog was often the greatest source of comfort. Children grow up with their pets, name them, love them, talk to them, sleep beside them on cold winter nights. The British love for animals was so famous, so deeply embedded in the national character, that it was considered part of what it meant to be British. And then came 1939 and everything changed. The summer of 1939 was beautiful in Britain, warm, sunny, peaceful on the surface. But underneath, everyone knew what was coming. Hitler had taken Austria, Hitler had taken Czechoslovakia, Hitler had taken just invaded Poland. War was not a possibility anymore. It was a certainty. And the British government began preparing for everything, including what to do about the animals. In the summer of 1939, the British government formed a special committee, the National Air Raid Precautions Animals Committee, now as a NARPAC. Their job was simple, but enormously difficult. Decide what Britain should do about its million of animals if war came. The committee looked at what had happened in World War I, and what they found disturbed them deeply. During World War I, abandoned feral pets in London had become a major crisis. Starving dogs wandered the streets. Desperate cats searched for food in bummed-out buildings. Animals wounded in air raids. Animals driven mad with fear by the sound of bombs. Animals left behind when families evacuated. September 3rd, 1939, Sunday morning. Chamberlain's announcement had barely finished echoing across the nation when the crisis began forming. Outside veterinary clinics, across London. Lines stretched half a mile long. Families standing quietly, holding their dogs on leads, carrying their cats in boxes, waiting their turn. It was described by witnesses as completely calm, completely orderly, which somehow made it worse. No screaming, no protests, just ordinary British people doing what they believed was right, doing what the government had told them was right. A woman in her 50s arrived at a clinic in East London. She was carrying a small brown dog, a terrier named Billy. She had owned him for 11 years. She handed him to the veterinarian, waited in silence, and walked home alone. She later told a neighbor, I thought it was the law. It was not the law. It was never compulsory. A widespread rumor had taken hold across Britain that it was now compulsory to destroy all domestic animals. It was completely untrue, but the fur had already spread too far to stop. Veterinary clinics ran out of chloroform, the most common method of euthanasia. Within the first 24 hours, crematoriums were overwhelmed. They could not run at night because of blackout conditions. All lights had to be extinguished to prevent German bombers from navigating by them. The bodies piled up. One local sanitarium offered its meadow as a burial ground. By the end of the week, 500,000 animals were interred in that single meadow. 500,000 in one meadow in 1 week. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of this story is who was standing in these lines. You might imagine that only the very poor came, people who generally could not afford to feed their animals. But the lines included everyone. Owners queuing outside clinics included surprisingly the healthy too. Doctors, teachers, shop owners, clerks, factory workers, housewives, all standing together, all holding the same thing, a pet they were about to lose forever. One account described a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, holding a large tabby cat tightly to her chest. Her mother stopped beside her, trying to explain. The little girl did not understand. She kept asking, But why? But why? It is a question that has echoed through history ever since. Because the truth is, most of these deaths were completely unnecessary. Much of the killing happened before the worst wartime shortage. Before the British had even begun, it was a panic tragedy, not a wartime necessity. The bombing that everyone fought so desperately did not begin until September 1940. A full year later, the food rationing that made people believe they could not feed their pets was not yet severe enough to justify killing a cat or dog. 750,000 animals died because of fur, because of a rumor, because of 7 words in a government pamphlet, and because sometimes, in moments of absolute terror, human beings make decisions they can never take back.
But here is what makes this story even more extraordinary. Not everyone killed their pets. Hundreds of thousands of families refused. They defied the panic, defied the rumors, kept their animals close. And when the British finally came in September 1940, when German bombs really did fall on London night after night, these animals became something extraordinary. Dogs sat beside their owners in underground shelters. Cats curled up in bombed-out buildings, keeping lonely, terrified people company through the longest nights of their lives. Stories emerged from the British, story after story, of animals that had saved lives, of animals that had given people the will to survive. A dog named Beauty became famous. She belonged to a PETSA rescue worker named Bill Barnett. During the British, Beauty located over 60 animals trapped under bomb rubble, saving their lives. She was awarded the Deakin Medal, the animal equivalent of the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor. A dog awarded a military honor by the same country that had killed 750,000 of her kind 12 months earlier. The irony was not lost, everyone. One journalist wrote at the time, "We killed our pets because we were afraid they could not survive the war. Then our pets helped us survive the war." The animals that had been kept alive became symbols of British resilience, of the famous British spirit that refused to break. While the memory of the ones that had been killed was quietly, carefully buried. And now we come to perhaps the strangest part of this entire story. What happened afterward? Because Brighton did not tell about the pet massacre. Not during the war, not after the war. The event received a lot of attention at the very beginning. But like painful events in a person's life, the memories were repressed. Brighton had built its entire wartime identity around courage, around stoicism, around the famous phrase, "Keep calm and carry on." The story of 750,000 panicked pet owners did not fit that image. So it was forgotten, deliberately, systematically, almost completely. When historian Hilda Keane first approached the Raspaka archives for information about the massacre, she was not told via email. There is no evidence in nor surviving records of the time of any massacre of the pets at the start of World War II. No evidence, despite the fact that the Raspaka on magazine had reported in October 1939. The work of destroying animals was continued day and night during the first week of the war. They had erased their own records, their own magazine reports, their own history, because it was too painful, too embarrassing, too incompatible with the hero story Brighton wanted to tell about itself. For decades, school children in Brighton learned about Dunkirk, about the Battle of Brighton, about Churchill speeches. Nobody learned about the 750,000 pets killed in the first week before a single German bomb had fallen on British soil.
September 1940, the British had begun. German bombers came every night, and the queues formed again. A second wave of pet owners arrived at clinics, carrying animals they had kept alive through the first panic of 1939. This time the reasons were different. This time the bombs were real. This time the food shortage were genuine. Families who had survived the first year of war now faced impossible choices. Their homes had been bombed, their food was running out, their neighborhoods were burning, and they still loved their animals, which made it so much harder. One woman described returning to her bombed street to find her house destroyed, her neighbor house destroyed, everything gone. Except her dog sitting in the rubble, tail wagging, wait for her to come home. She could not bring herself to have him killed. Even now, even nothing. She fed him her own rations for weeks, going hungry herself to keep him alive. He was all I had left, she told a neighbor. I could not take him there. Stories like this exist alongside the quiz. Two kinds of love, both real, both desperate, both trying to do what was right in a world where nothing was right anymore. 750,000. It is a number that is difficult to comprehend. It is 6 times greater than the number of British civilians killed by German bombing during the entire war. 6 times more animals were killed by their own owners in 1 week than civilians killed by the enemy in 6 years. Let that sink in. The British pet massacre show that war can do before a war has even fully arrived. No bombing campaign forced this September 1939. That's much of the killing happened before the worst wartime shortage. Before the British, it was a panic tragedy, not a battlefield one. That is exactly what makes it so haunting. These were not cruel people. These were not heartless people. These were ordinary men and women who loved their animals deeply and who were so terrified, so overwhelmed by a fear of what was coming that they made a decision in one terrible moment that they spent the rest of their lives regretting. It reveals how quickly ordinary people under pressure can normalize something they would normally find unthinkable. That is the real lesson of this story. Not that the British were cruel,
But that fire is the most dangerous weapon ever invented. More dangerous than any bomb, more destructive than any army. Because bombs destroy buildings, fire destroys people from the inside. The British pet massacre of 1939 is not taught in schools. It is not in most history books. For 80 years, it has existed in the shadow. A footnote, a whisper, a thing Britain preferred not to remember. But the animals deserve to be remembered. The 750,000 dogs and cats who did nothing wrong, who were loved completely, who were killed not out of cruelty, but out of fear so overwhelming. It consumed everything in its parts. If this story moved you, it should, because it is a story about love, about her, about fur, about the impossible choices ordinary people make when the world they know disappears overnight. And it is a reminder that history is never just about battles and generals. Sometimes the most important history happens on a quiet street in a city that is nothing, not being burning, in the arms of a person who loved their animals and was simply too afraid. Share this story because these animals never had a voice. Now they do. I will see you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe the channel and like the video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.